Last week, we really put the focus
Thank you, Alishia, for having me.
On the broader economy, where a driving growth was firmly on the agenda, on the CBK's agenda. And with that, falling interest rates have gotten a lot of attention. Now, this is expected to trigger a readjustment in investment portfolios that could herald a shift towards the stock market. What are you anticipating as a result of that market dynamic we're seeing evolve?
Absolutely, I agree with you. You know, the central bank have done an excellent job of steering rates a lot lower. T-bill rates are below 3.5%. Five-year bond yields are at 650 or so. But this has not transmitted to date into the retail and commercial lending rate. And I think you're going to see a sharp slide in that rate. It is inevitable, and it's very close to a tipping point. And I think that in turn, I mean, there's not much more juice, I think, in the bond market now. It's really priced for perfection. And I think, as you said, you're going to see a sharp switch out of bonds into equities.
That having been said, is there a need to put measures in place to avoid a situation where rates will fall to a level that is no longer tenable to invest in government securities, like we saw back in 2003, similarly in 2007, where we saw falling yields on fixed securities actually result in a shift to the equity market, which resulted in a peak of, what, 5,000 points at that stage?
Yes, I think, you know, the government is in a sweet spot. They can probably continue selling at this sort of rates on the yield curve. But I think in terms for investors, if you're buying the bond market in Kenya today, I mean, I don't see how much more upside you're going to look for unless interest rates, unless inflation collapses. And I think, you know, we've had a lot of that inflation upside now. So I, for one, agree with what you're saying. I think it's, you know, that we will see a large shift, but the government has still a large borrowing requirement.
Yep, well, let's look at who's playing in this market here, because it's not just local investors that we're looking at. We know that, for example, one rationale behind Standard Chartered's acquisition of the custody business in Barclays is to give Asian customers particularly the opportunity to invest in Africa's capital markets, Kenya being a very big part of that. I mean, what interest has the market been seeing from investors in the East? Are you seeing strong evidence of that kind of flow?
I think you were going to have an absolute tsunami wave of interest. I think we're on the cusp of a breakout in terms of capital flows coming from Asia, in particular China. I think as a whole, the world is underinvested in the African Renaissance story, probably at 25% of the benchmark. I think this is really a wonderful and rising tide as everybody seeks to up that allocation. Asia is sorely missing today. They've come in on the big projects, but they've yet to allocate money into the equity market. So I think that's just around the corner. I think the tie-ups between Standard Bank and ICBC are another classic example of what is going to happen. And I think the investment flows have not matched the trade curve, which has been on a hyper-growth curve, Africa, China, for more than 10 years now. So absolutely, I agree with what you're saying, and I think that's exactly what was driving the purchase of that custody business, and I think it was a very clever purchase.
Well, if we look at some of the interests or some of the stocks that are getting foreign investor interest, I mean, East African Breweries ranks high amongst those. I mean, it's that interest specifically that's pushed that share price to 12-month highs. Let's get into the investment case here, because it has to be more than just about liquidity that this counter offers.
Well, I think, you know, at a price earnings ratio of 20, it looks a little bit toppy to me. But, you know, what it is it's the old adage that when people look at emerging markets, they feel very comfortable investing in beer, in cement. These are the classic investment homes for people who want to invest. It is a benchmark. It is the second biggest and most liquid stock at the Nairobi Stock Exchange. But having looked at it, at a price of a PE of 20, you're taking a lot on promise. In particular, I think investors are keen on the purchase of Serengeti and believe that breweries can do a lot more throughput via that purchase. And I think that's correct. But you know, if you're looking at breweries at 20, you're looking at Safaricom at 14. I prefer to bet on the information economy rather than the beer.
Yep, well, certainly Safaricom managing to hold pretty steady, but you've got a pretty bullish outlook for that share price moving forward, right?
Very. I have, absolutely. I think everyone has underestimated the growth curve, whether they're in Moscow or whether they're in London. We've had this series of upgrades going on. I think the M-Kesha transaction is transformative. It's turning the mobile phone into a bank. Yeah. And I think they have not put a foot wrong. In terms of execution across the African continent, I can't find another company that has done as well.
Well, investors may well be underestimating the growth curve on that end. Was there a bit of overestimating in terms of expectations on KQ? Because we've seen KQ pulling back after those full year numbers were released on Friday. I mean, had a lot of what came to the fore in terms of those numbers being factored in already?
I think so. I think the market was looking for a higher number on Friday. I think they expected a stronger high beta rebound. I had an estimate EPS of between 6 and 8. It came in at 4.4. I think it was lower than the market expected. So I think you got a bit of profit taking coming in. I think you're going to need more color on the forward book right now to push this price up. We're trading at a trailing PE of 12. This is a highly volatile business. There are lots of risks attached to it. I thought that rebound would have been stronger. It'll be interesting to watch how the share price performs over the next week. Having said all of that, they're in a very, very sweet spot, which is the inter-African flight curve, which is east to west, south to north, and I think they have a lock on that in a powerful way. But I, for one, would like to see, a shake-up in this organization. It's been the same story. It needs some kind of inflection, I think.